In this tutorial, we're going to be learning how to crochet gingham and checks. So to get the gingham effect, we're going to be using 3 different colours, a light colour, a medium colour and a dark colour. To get the checkerboard, you're just going to be using the 2 colours and alternating between them. So I'm going to be working gingham for this tutorial. So to work the gingham, we're either going to start with the lightest colour or the darkest colour. Start by making a slip knot using whatever method you prefer, and then your starting chain for this pattern needs to be a multiple of 4 plus 2. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to go for 26, and I'll meet you at the end of your chain. So to work the gingham or the checkerboard stitch, we're going to be working double crochet in rows. That's double crochet in US terms. If you use UK terms, this stitch is called a treble crochet. So we're going to be working double crochet in rows and changing colours at specific points and carrying our yarn with us. There's not lots of ends to weave in. So I'm going to take you through all of that step by step, so don't worry if you're a beginner. So to work our first stitch, we're going to skip the first 3 chains. So skip, 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 and work a double crochet in the 4th chain from the hook there. So there's my double crochet. That first chain of 3, those 3 chains that we skipped, that now counts as our first double crochet stitch. Next, work a double crochet in the next stitch. So we're going to be changing colours every 4 stitches. So grab your medium colour of yarn and pull at the end, ready to pick it up so we can change colour. So I'll show you how we change colour during the next stitch. So yarn over, put your hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 and stop. So what we've done here is we've made a partial double crochet. We've stopped just before we do the final yarn over and pull through to finish off that double crochet stitch. So to change colour, we're going to drop our green yarn, pick up the medium coloured yarn, so this lighter green yarn, and I'm going to lay that yarn over my crochet hook and use my crochet hook to pull a loop through to finish off that double crochet. So we've now successfully changed colours. So we need to do a little bit of yarn management here because we've now got like lots of ends. So our end of our medium colour, I'm going to tuck over here and hold it alongside my hook so it's out of the way, and then we've got a lighter green colour and a darker green colour. For the next 4 stitches, we're going to crochet over the top of this darker green colour and carry it along our work so we don't have to keep cutting our yarn. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to make a double crochet in the next stitch with this lighter green colour, and I'm going to hold my green yarn next to my chain as I do it. So I'm going to make that double crochet in the next chain. And when I do this yarn over and pull through, can you see how my darker green yarn here is over the top of my crochet hook? And that's how we hide this end of yarn. So I'm crocheting over the top. And you see how my crochet stitch has caught that dark green yarn. Then we're going to finish off our double crochet stitch as we normally would. And we're going to work a total of 4 double crochets in this light green colour, whilst crocheting over the top of the dark green colour, and we're going to do 4 double crochets total before we change colour again. So we've done 1, so let's do 2 more. So I'm going to do another double crochet, making sure I'm catching the darker green yarn, and again catching that darker green yarn. So I've now worked 3 double crochets, and we're changing colour every 4 stitches, so I know that at the end of the next double crochet we need to swap back to this green colour. So let's do that together. So I'm going to yarn over, put my hook in the next chain, being sure to catch this darker green colour, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. I'm then going to drop the lighter green yarn. I like to drop this behind my crochet. Then I'm going to pick up the darker green yarn at the front. So if you can see, I've kind of crossed the lighter and the darker colour over. So the colour I'm picking up and about to crochet with is in front of the colour I've just dropped there. Then yarn over and pull through those 2 loops to finish off that final double crochet. We're going to keep repeating this across. So we're going to do another repeat together. So this time I'm using the darker green colour and I'm going to be catching the lighter green colour as I crochet. So I'm going to yarn over and make my double crochet in the next chain, catching that lighter green yarn, just like that. So if you can see, if I show you from the back, you can see there where I've caught that yarn underneath my stitch. I do this when I'm weaving my ends in sometimes as well. It just makes it a little bit easier to catch your yarn tails a few times with your crochet stitches. So yes, and then we're going to work 2 more double crochets, catching that lighter green yarn. And then my next stitch is going to be my 4th double crochet in the darker colour, so I'm going to swap colours at the end of it. So yarn over, put your hook into the next chain, catch the light green colour, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, drop the darker colour behind and bring the lighter colour in front. So again, I've swapped those colours. So the colour that I've dropped, the dark green, I've put to the back, and the lighter colour I've brought to the front. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull through those 2 loops to finish off that colour. So we're going to repeat this all the way along your chain, changing colours every 4 stitches and crocheting over your colours, and then come back to this tutorial just before you do the final colour change, so where you've got 4 chains left and you're doing your final colour change, because we do this final colour change a little bit differently to manage our yarn for the next row. So I've continued working along changing colours every 4 stitches, and I'm just about to do my final colour change, and I've got 4 chains left unworked, and we're going to do this colour change slightly differently. So I'm going to pick up that lighter colour, making sure it's to the front of the darker colour, and I'm going to finish off this stitch just as we normally would. And then usually now we would crochet along over the top of this darker green colour, but there's actually no need to do this, because our next time we're changing colours is when we come back and do the next row. So what we're going to do instead is I'm going to take my darker green colour and I'm going to bring it to the front, so it's now to the front of that colour, and I'm just going to put it over here like that. So I'll show you that again. So my green, so the colour I've just dropped is at the front, and I'm going to bring it up across over like this, and that just gets the yarn tail there ready for the colour change on row 2. So now I'm going to finish off this row by working my final 4 double crochet stitches in this lighter green colour, and I'll meet you at the end of the row. So this is what your crochet should look like at the end of row 1. I've got the working yarn of my lighter green colour at the end. Yours might be the darker colour here depending on your starting chain, but I've got 1 yarn end here, and I've got my second colour attached here. I've not cut this yarn, it's still continued on, and then I've got my tail of the colour we joined over here. So let's move on to row 2. Start row 2 with a chain of 3. This counts as your first double crochet stitch. Then turn your work over. Because that chain 3 counts as our first double crochet stitch, we're going to skip this first stitch here and work a double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So I'm skipping this one here, working a double crochet into this stitch and then into the next stitch. And on the next stitch we're going to change colour, and if you remember we managed our darker green yarn differently, and it should be coming up the back of your crochet here. So what we're going to do now is change colours on the next stitch. So I'm going to start working that stitch as normal until the last yarn over and pull through where we're going to change colours. And then I'm going to drop my lighter colour, pick up my darker colour, yarn over and pull through, and we've successfully changed colours, and as you can see we've pulled up our working yarn here. By doing this we haven't got to carry it all the way to the end and then all the way back, so it saves you a little bit of yarn by doing this. So we're now going to continue the technique that we did on row 1, where we crochet 4 double crochets whilst catching the second colour with our crochet, and we change colours every 4 stitches just like we did on row 1. So continue doing that all the way along, and I'll meet you over here and I'll show you how we finish off the row. So I've continued working along changing colours every 4 stitches, and I'm just about to do my final colour change. And if you remember down here when we were working row 1, after we did our colour change, we moved one of the colours up ready for row 2. We're not going to be doing this in this row. We're going to continue crocheting over the end. So I'm going to pick up my next colour, finish off that final colour change, and then I'm going to work 4 double crochets as normal, catching that yarn as I crochet. So continue working those 4 stitches, and then your final double crochet should be in the top of the starting chain here that we used to count as a double crochet at the start of row 1. So my final stitch is in that stitch there, and we're actually going to change colour during this stitch. And if I just grab one of these to show you, on every row we're using this medium colour, and we've just worked this row down here, so we're actually going to need our medium colour for the first stitch of row 3. So that's why we're changing colours at the last stitch. So I'm going to work that final stitch, catching that yarn there into the top of this starting chain. If I can find where I'm putting my hook, so I'm putting my hook in there. Then I'm going to finish off this double crochet, stopping before the final yarn over and pull through, and I'm going to drop this darker colour. We're not going to be picking this darker colour back up for until row 5 now, but we're not going to cut it or anything, we're just going to leave it so we can carry our yarn up the sides of our work. Then I'm going to pick up the lighter colour and pull through those 2 loops. That's finished off that row, and we're now set up ready for row 3. So for rows 3 and 4, we're going to be alternating colours between our lighter green colour and the lightest colour, which I'm using an off-white. So I've pulled up my yarn end ready for when I need to join it into our crochet. So to start row 3, make a chain of 3. This counts as your first double crochet, then turn your work over. Because this counts as your first double crochet, we're going to skip this first stitch and work a double crochet into the next 2 stitches. So 1, 2, and on the next stitch we're going to join in the off-white colour on the final yarn over and pull through. So I'm going to work that double crochet until I've got 1 yarn over and pull through left. I'm going to drop the light green yarn just like we did on the previous 2 rows, pick up the off-white yarn colour, lay it over my crochet hook and pull up a loop to finish off that double crochet stitch. So row 3 is now the same as row 1, but we're going to be alternating between the lighter green and the off-white colour. So you're going to continue working along, working those 4 double crochets, catching the colour that's not being used, and then on that 4th double crochet changing colours. So continue working that all the way along until you get to your final colour change, and we're going to do a different colour change here just like we did in row 1, so I will meet you over here. So I've continued working all the way along, and I'm just about to do my final colour change. So for our colour change here, we're going to do it slightly differently to make sure our yarn is up over here and not over here at the beginning of our next row, which is exactly the same as what we did in row 1. So I'm going to bring up my white yarn to the front and do a yarn over and pull through, and then before I work my first stitch, I'm going to grab this green yarn, I'm going to pull it up over here over the top of my white yarn again there, so can you see I've crossed them. I'm going to pull it over here next to my crochet hook so it's out the way and ready for the next row. We're then going to finish off row 3 as normal, so I'm just going to work those final 4 double crochets with the final double crochet in the top of the starting chain from the last row, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll work row 4. So for row 4, we're going to be doing the same as what we did for row 2, however we're going to be using obviously the off-white and the lighter colour rather than the darker colour and the lighter colour. So start row 4 with a chain of 3, this counts as your first double crochet stitch, then turn your work over. Because that counts as our first stitch, we're going to skip this first double crochet again, we're going to work a double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. And then we're going to change colours when we work our 4th stitch. So I'm going to work that double crochet all the way through until the last yarn over and pull through. I'm going to drop my white yarn behind my work, bring up the green to the front, yarn over and pull through to finish off that double crochet stitch, and we've successfully changed colours. And then continue working in the same pattern all the way along the row, working 4 stitches, then changing colour and crocheting over the top of the colour we're not working. So continue doing that all the way to the end of the row. Your final stitch will be in the top of this starting chain, and then I'll meet you here because we are going to drop our off-white yarn and pick up our green yarn for row 5, and it's a little bit different to how we've worked our previous 4 rows. So I've continued working my way along row 4, and I've just got my final stitch left to work, and I've crocheted my last 3 stitches over the off-white coloured yarn. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to change colours, and we're going to pick up this dark green colour for the final yarn over and pull through. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to start making my double crochet into that top of the starting chain that counts as a double crochet from the row below there, making sure to catch that off-white colour. I'm going to work that double crochet, and I've stopped before the final yarn over and pull through, and then I'm going to drop this light green colour. I'm going to pick up the dark green colour from all the way down here. Now it's really important here that firstly you bring the darker colour to the front over the top of both of your other colours here, and secondly is don't pull too tight on this yarn. So we're going to do a yarn over and pull through, and if you pull on this yarn too tight here like that, it's going to make the sides of your work ruffle up. So we need to make sure this length of yarn here where we've carried our work up is just enough to get our loop to the right height. It's not too tight and it's not loose and baggy, because if it's out here, it's going to A, get caught on things, and B, it's going to make your stitches up here really loose. So we need to make sure we've got just the right amount of tension, just like when we do normal crochet. We're now ready to start row 5. So row 5 is the same as row 3, but we're going to obviously be working in the darker green colour and the lighter green colour and not the off-white. So we're going to leave the off-white hanging to be picked up at the beginning of row 7, I believe. But we need to get this light green colour over here, ready for the next colour. So I'll show you how we do that. So start by making a chain 3, that counts as your first double crochet, then turn your work over. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pick up this light green colour down here, or whatever colour it is that you're using. I'm in a bit of a tangle here, these colours do get all twisted around each other. You need to be on top of like pulling the yarn up and untangling them with this stitch, because with all these colours they just get tangled around each other. So I'm going to take this light green yarn and I'm going to bring it up so I can crochet over the top of it. So I'm bringing it up next to my stitches, ready to crochet over the top of it. And that means we can get it over here ready for our next colour change. And apart from that step, this row is exactly the same as row 3. So I'm going to skip this first stitch and work a double crochet in the next stitch, making sure to catch that yarn there. I'm going to work those stitches until the point that I need to make a colour change. So I'm now ready to make my colour change. I've worked those 4 double crochets because that chain 3 counts as a stitch. I'm going to drop my yarn behind my work, pick up the next colour to the front of my work, yarn over and pull through. And then the rest of the row is the same as row 3, and then you're going to continue repeating this 4-row repeat, changing colours just as we've done until your crochet is the size you want it to be. So I'm just editing the gingham tutorial and I realised I didn't explain very well about carrying up the yarn the side of your work. So as you can see, we've got these loops of yarn up the side of our work, and that's why we've carried up the colours, because we're not using, say, the dark colour on these 2 rows or the lighter colour on these 2 rows. So we drop the yarn and then we pick it back up when we need to use it again. So with these loops, I have shown how to carry yarn up the side of your crochet like this on previous tutorials, but I recommend that when you go back and work your border, you crochet over the top of these, and that should stop any, for example, if you're doing a baby blanket, you don't want little fingers getting caught in that, so make sure you do a border over the top of them. And then when we're working row 7, so if we have a look at this swatch here, so if we have a look, so the last time we used the off-white colour 1, 2, 3 on row 4 was this stitch here, and then together in the tutorial we crocheted over the top of it to get it to the side of the work, and then we dropped it for 2 rows whilst we worked rows 5 and 6 with a darker colour. Then when we need the off-white colour, we actually need it here, not here. So if you can see here, so I've carried the yarn at the side of my work, and then if I pull my crochet a bit, so I've crocheted over the top of the off-white yarn to make sure it's here, ready for when I need it. So at the beginning of row 7, I picked up this yarn and caught the yarn, just like we did with the yarn at the beginning of row 5. I picked it up, caught it all the way along, so it's there ready to change colours. And then you continue this all the way up the side of your work. So yeah, I hope that makes sense, and then we'll go back to finish off the rest of the tutorial. So as you can see, for the gingham pattern, we are using the lighter of the colours on every row. On the first 2 rows, we're doing the darker colour, and the second 2 colours, the off-white, then the darker colour, then the off-white. If you wanted to work this stitch as a checkerboard, it's actually a little bit easier than the gingham because you're only working with the 2 colours and you're working them on every row. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on how to crochet gingham or checks. Just for your information, the technique we've done where we've been doing these mid-row colour changing and carrying our yarn along is called tapestry crochet. If you'd like to learn some more interesting crochet stitches and techniques, I'll pop a playlist here, and most of them are beginner friendly. So yeah, I'll see you next week.